Hello, I'm Nima Rajan. The head of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development says it is probably the most uncertain and dramatic outlook in its history. The Paris-based organization says the COVID-19 crisis has triggered the worst global recession in nearly a century, and it warns that the pain is not over yet, even if there's no second wave of infections. In the best-case scenario, it is forecasting a global drop in economic output of 6% this year and says that figure will rise to 7.6% in the event of a second wave. Government House Leader Pablo Rodriguez admits that there is no unanimous consent for a contentious piece of emergency legislation that would extend COVID-19 aid programs. Mr. Rodriguez says the bill is the quickest and most efficient way to get help to disabled Canadians, seasonal workers, and some added businesses. But the NDP is against the part of the bill that would impose penalties on anyone fraudulently claiming the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. It was reported today that 190,000 people have returned CERB payments that they weren't eligible for. In the U.S., George Floyd's brother testified on Capitol Hill today before a House Judiciary Committee hearing on police brutality. Philonise Floyd asked for his brother's memory to be honored and for change to come from his death. Republicans in Congress are quickly trying to craft legislation to change police practices and accountability, while Democrats have unveiled the most sweeping police overhaul in years. Well, meanwhile, the top infectious disease expert in the U.S. says the World Health Organization had to backtrack on its statement about asymptomatic spread of COVID-19 being rare because it was not correct. Yesterday, a top WHO official appeared to suggest that people without COVID-19 symptoms rarely transmit the virus. This morning, Dr. Anthony Fauci said there is no evidence that asymptomatic people don't infect others. Canada's push for a seat on the UN Security Council may rely on the support of developing island nations, if Greta Thunberg has anything to say about it. The teenage climate activist has joined forces with others to pen a letter to the UN ambassadors of small island developing states, asking them to press Canada and Norway to live up to their climate change promises or lose the support. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has devoted a lot of political capital to win one of two seats amongst three contenders. Well, with many billions of dollars being spent on COVID-19 aid programs, the Conservatives say Auditor General Karen Hogan's office needs a budget increase to monitor the Liberals' actions. Conservative MPs Tim Upal and Pierre Poilievre held a press conference yesterday calling on the government to properly fund the Auditor General. Mr. Poilievre made a formal motion to the Finance Committee, which received unanimous support. Leaders of Ontario's opposition are calling on Premier Doug Ford to release a list of his pandemic medical advisors. The NDP, Liberals, and Greens have all asked Ford to disclose the medical and scientific professionals that the province has turned to for guidance during the pandemic. Ford defended his advisors yesterday during his COVID-19 media briefing, refusing to release their names because of privacy concerns. Halifax Council has voted to rescind the purchase of a police armored vehicle with a rotating roof hatch, 8 gun ports, and a powered battering ram. It will instead use the $300,000 to fund programs to reduce anti-Black racism. Another $89,500 will go towards programs for diversity, inclusion, and public safety. A public inquiry into money laundering has heard that British Columbia appears to have more high-level organized crime groups than any other province. The Director General of Criminal Intelligence Service Canada has assessed 680 of the more than 1,800 organized crime groups known to operate in Canada. RCMP Chief Superintendent Rob Gilchrist says 1/4 of the assessed groups are known to be involved in money laundering, although the agency believes that figure to be low. British Columbia's port access and proximity to Mexico make it a natural gateway for illicit drugs into other parts of Western Canada. China says it is taking measures with India to reduce tensions along their border following a recent flare-up that prompted rock throwing and fistfights. The Foreign Ministry spokesperson said today that both sides have engaged in effective communication through diplomatic and military channels. Thousands of soldiers from the two countries have been facing off just a few hundred meters from each other for a month in the Indian-controlled Ladakh region. Army officers have held a series of meetings to try and break the impasse. Residents say suspected members of the Islamic extremist group Boko Haram have killed at least 69 people in a village in Nigeria's northeast. The residents say Tuesday's attack was likely in retaliation for resistance against an assault weeks ago. A local defense force member says the attackers arrived on motorcycles and fired on adults and children in an attack that lasted more than 2 hours. The death toll may be higher because some people are still missing. Well, after 3 months of near total blackout of cinemas nationwide, movie theaters are preparing to reopen, even if it means only a few titles on the marquee and showings limited to as little as 25% capacity. AMC Theaters, the world's largest theater operator, says it is planning on having the bulk of its operations back up and running in some capacity by mid-July. Still, the larger question might be whether moviegoers feel safe returning to theaters in the new COVID-19 era. A 20-year-old university business student plans to launch a petition next week to get the Alberta government to provide more anti-racism learning, starting in elementary schools. Daniel Afolabi remembers a boy on the opposing soccer team in Okotoks refusing to shake his hand because of his black skin. He was just 9 at that time and says racism followed him through high school. Mr. Afolabi says the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis pushed him to take action. Well, that'll do it for today's news update. I'm Nima Rajan. Thank you for joining us today, and I'll see you next time.